So it's really quite amazing that you've spent the last 40 years or so, roughly, thinking about and describing the systems that we're really striving to create today using blockchain technology. So I'm really curious as to what you believe to be the main contributing factors that ultimately allowed you to envision such a radically different future in which secure multi-user interaction was able to take place.
Okay, I love this question. There's several key elements that were quite formative in my uh, uh, being able to see forward in these ways. Um, One thing is really very generic, but I think should not be underestimated in its importance, which is I was a big reader of science fiction that um, and taking very seriously from having been exposed to so much science fiction that technological progress shapes the future more so than anything else, which I still believe, and that it can take the future in surprising directions, uh, and that the future can be very different than the present, and it can happen fast. So, just sort of generally approaching all these matters with that seriousness about technology and progress and change of the future. Um, I In 1975, a friend of mine handed me Ted Nelson's book, Computer Lib Dream Machines, which was Ted Nelson, a really great visionary, uh, his his dreams about the future of computing, which was largely focused on the future of uh, interactive systems. Um, but uh, it wasn't a shallow focus on the screen. It was a really quite a deep focus, driven by the notion of people interacting with information on computer screens. Um, uh, but he was one of the two great hypertext visionaries. Very brief history of hypertext, just sort of high, biased towards highlighting, how it influences the main story I'm telling today. Hypertext itself started, in some sense, with Vannevar Bush's 1945 paper, As We May Think. Vannevar Bush was President Eisenhower's science advisor. He published a article in The Atlantic imagining what we would now call a user experience of hypertext documents, of linked documents, but he was imagining it all. He was painting the picture as the future with microfilm and microfiche technology, because that's all that they had to imagine it with. Um, Doug Engelbart and Ted Nelson both remember reading that article as children. Um, they grew up in the 60s to form the two great hypertext visions. Uh, Doug Engelbart, the augment system, NLS, which, by the way, all of the Kikos design documents were done in augment. Um, and a lot of the beauty of Kikos is they attribute to the to what was some of what was different in the design process that was possible to them because they were writing their documents in augment. Um, and then also Ted Nelson in um, the early 60s formed the Xanadu vision and started building that out, and then really explained it very well in Computer Lib Dream Machines. Uh, when I read Computer Lib Dream Machines, I was really grabbed by the whole Xanadu vision, and ended up deciding that um, that this whole vision of computation from that's laid out here was very much the computation that I wanted to learn about. So I ended up in the summers between some, between school. During the summers, I apprenticed myself for free to Ted Nelson. I contacted Ted Nelson, but apprenticed myself to him. I ended up working on the Xanadu project, becoming the chief architect of what became known as the Xanadu Green architecture. But at Xanadu, part of Ted's vision was, and this is why the book is called Computer Lib, is computers and decentralized networks and worldwide hypertext publishing as a liberating force. We were, both Ted and I were quite terrified of the vision of laid out by George Orwell in 1984, but being Ted's apprentice, I very much absorbed this notion of the future is a choice. We can either end up in a world of 1984 style oppression, or we can end up in this world of hypertext publishing, of electronic publishing on computer networks, if we can figure out how to build those things out in a way that was free of censorship, free of modifying of history, which was one of the main forms of oppression from 1984, and free of monitoring, something that was inherently private. One of the things that was an essential part of the Xanadu vision and then of the Xanadu architecture was for nobody to be able to know what you're reading. That's the thing that I found most bizarre about the hypertext system that that then took over the world, the web, which is with the web architecture, not only can the server that serves the document know what document you're reading, but with the Web 2 architecture, they can know where you are in the document, how much time you're spending looking at which paragraph, how your mouse is moving. The degree of violation of privacy of people reading things to take in information is just something that it just not in my wildest nightmares would I ever have thought that masses of public would have accepted that kind of loss of privacy. So in any case, I very much absorbed from Ted this notion that we're at a choice point, that humanity is at a choice point, that these electronic networks are coming, and it could be a 1984 style nightmare, or it could be a great liberating force. And I also very much, sort of took up the idea that it was our responsibility to figure out how to build the great liberating force, that how it turns out depends on what we build.